Fellow redditors, what was a moment where you thought a person you knew might be an actual psychopath? When I was about 7 or 8 there was a kid who was about 6. We found a baby bird that fell out of its nest. In the time it took for me to go home and tell an adult, he put it in the road and ran over it on his bike and laughed. Last I heard he's in jail for beating his girlfriend. Frick you Kevin. Screw Kevin bro. When he told me he was a psychopath. Not even kidding. He's a pretty cool guy though and goes to therapy and everything for it. He does his best to relate to people and judge emotion, but it's difficult for him to hold relationships. Pretty smart and is doing the best he can. Hopefully one of the more light-hearted stories on here. Not every psychopath is a monster. They simply have no remorse and very little emotions. It makes it easy to do heinous things when you don't feel bad for it, but it still doesn't change the character of the person. Some people are good, even if they feel no remorse. There is no universal law that says psychopath equals ultimate evil person. I don't have specific moment that's odd, but I have a friend who told me she is schizophrenic and psychopathic. Layman's terms, she hears voices and doesn't really quite understand, care or feels others' emotions. But what makes her a bit of an anomaly is that the voices in her head tell her to do good things and how other people might be feeling. Tip a little extra. Your friend needs a hug right now. Go help your co-worker with their work. Compliment the shoes. They are new. You're doing just fine. Etc. It's quite interesting. My mom was a teacher in a children's, teens, psych hospital. She said she once had a kid who was schizophrenic, and the voices would just tell him jokes all day. So oftentimes he'd distracted, unengaged and be just laughing to himself. I'm a college librarian. He was one of my students who came in a lot. He was super charming and good looking and altogether empty inside. No depth, no emotions, no regard for others. One of our staff straight up said, "That boy's a psychopath." She had been a social worker, so I trusted her opinion and agreed. He collected types of women. He told me about seducing a female, married, military chaplain and getting her to do obscene things she didn't want to. Then he got bored with her and moved on. He eventually got his master's degree and now works on the military base making big bucks, getting everyone else to do his work for him. Sometimes psychopaths are dangerous in other ways. He set fire in the attic 3 times, was disgusted by all animals and would try and abuse our cat whilst we weren't there or looking. Went out and bought a load of knives and swords and kept them in his bed. When I was 8 I let my older cousin, who was probably 11 or 12 at the time, hold my hamster. She was begin really rough with it, so I told her to put it back into its cage. She got really mad after this and just stared at me for about 2 minutes before she turned around and threw my hamster into the wall. My poor hamster died instantly and I was crying because my hamster had just gotten murdered. I knew after she threw it something was extremely wrong with her, and my mom made my aunt come and pick her up and she wasn't allowed to be near any animals after this. It's been almost 4 years since I've talked to her, but apparently she gets into fights almost weekly and beat somebody so bad they had to go to here. She's in therapy and has spent time in juvenile detention. All of my other cousins are afraid of her and many of us think she's going to eventually kill somebody. I honestly think the best place for her would be a mental health hospital. I met an individual who later pled guilty to his involvement in about 14 murders. During an interview about his childhood and personal life, it became very apparent that he had no interest in other people and that they were basically NPCs to him, even his girlfriend and child. He was in a gang and his behavior was basically shadowing the other guys with status. He had a girlfriend because that's what the other guys did. He had a fancy car. He wore the right clothes. The other guys figured out early on that he was not bothered by murder or gunfights, so he was their hitter. During the interview, he was perfectly polite, but utterly flat in his affect and didn't attempt to dissemble or minimize a lot of terrible things that happened to him or the things he'd done. It made for an interesting interview. I kinda wanna see this interview. It sounds interesting. I remember the point at which I recognized sociopathy in my ex. We sat down on his bed at night and I asked him to tell me things about himself, because even though we were dating I knew nothing about him. He could not give an answer beyond surface level on any emotional topic. I looked in his eyes and saw nothingness. I realized why I could never emotionally read him or get any sort of feel. He did tell me after we broke up that he can't feel emotions and how much it sucks. I didn't understand this until much later. Before we dated, I remember him telling me how manipulative he is. With a smile. He lied constantly about everything and had 15 other relationships before me, all ending within a month. Yes, an obvious red flag that I ignored. He would jump from religion to atheism every other month. He would repeat cycles over and over. He was known by everyone and liked by many. Very charming. Had a flirty personality. Loved risk taking for no reason. Always got into trouble. One thing I've learned is to pay close attention to the first thing someone tells you about themselves. It usually contains volumes of information. He found God 3 times in the course of a year, each time after he had been seen doing significant property damage or emotionally abusing a girl he was with. Like the God thing was a quick trick to get people off his butt. To be honest, I think things like this are kind of common. People claiming to find God to excuse them from bad behavior. SMH. One of my neighbors when I was little had some hamsters. One day I was at her house and she started squeezing them and making them poop because she thought it was funny. She just kept squeezing them harder and harder. I told her to stop or she might hurt them and she started laughing. The next day I asked her grandma what happened to her hamsters and she told me they all died. Another time we were making PB&J sandwiches in her room. IDKYLOL. And she cornered me with a knife while laughing. I looked her up a few years ago and found her mugshot. Met a guy and we started talking. The conversation came up about animals. That conversation then led to the killing of animals since I told him a story about how when I was young I climbed a tree and accidentally stepped on a bird's nest and crushed the eggs. I told him that I was scarred for life after that event. He then told me how he killed chickens cause he owned and used them for food, so pretty normal, right? Well, I was wrong. We were out and all of a sudden he tells me if I want to go kill a pigeon and set other animals on fire with him. I told him I did not really feel like it, so he took me to eat some chicken nuggets. Went on a second date with him, but we are not here to talk about my life choices. Love that closer. Played soccer with a guy in high school that had a real short temper and enjoyed playing the sport as rough as possible. Even at practice, coaches had to tell him to calm down all the time. Everyone hated him and stayed away from him. Several years later he murdered a classmate of mine over some weed. He hid the body under a pile of leaves in his backyard. When I heard the news, I wasn't surprised in the least. My older sister used to absolutely torture me when I was a kid. When I was 5'6", she was 7'8". I was afraid of bugs. She would spend hours trapping bugs and putting them in my Matchbox cars. Then she'd say, "Hey, seems so forbid, wanna play cars?" I would get super excited because she never wanted to play with me. I'd run to my cars and there would be bugs crawly all over. Then when I was 7, I was obsessed with Barbies. One day she grabbed my favorite Barbie and Ken and threw them under the bed. I stuck my tongue out at her and climbed under the bed to get them. As I army crawled in the cramped space, my arms started to hurt. I was getting pricked all over every time I moved. And I was bleeding. It took me until I was halfway way under the bed to figure out what my psychopath sister had done. She had spent all morning weaving push pins into the carpet so the points would stick up and stab me. She then tricked me into climbing under the bed. So, there I am, halfway in with my precious Barbie and Ken at the back wall. I had to decide to cut my losses and abandon Barbie and Ken, or climb the rest of the way through the Saw-esque minefield and back out. I bit the bullet. Amen. If you read this, frick you. This is frankly horrific. Even more so because your parents couldn't protect you. I am just so sorry you grew up with this threat. Stay safe. A few years ago, I had to put my cat, Rex, down. He was 21 years. In passing, not too long ago, I mentioned this to a friend I've known for over 35 years. Out of nowhere he made the statement, "I always liked killing cats." I did a double take to see if he was kidding. He wasn't. Haven't spoken to him since. The crap people say about pets to people who love them is astounding. I told a friend that I was struggling to come up with the cash for a procedure my cat needed or he would most likely die. I wasn't asking for help or advice, just venting. He told me he could take care of it for around 50 cents. When I asked how, he told me it was the price of a bullet. She kicked my leg while we were ice skating to make me fall. I really hurt my back. I couldn't get up, could barely talk and had trouble breathing. I asked her please to call someone, but she just stood there and laughed at me for a few minutes until I was able to crawl to my phone and call someone. She also said to my adopted brother that he is worth nothing because even his real parents left him in the trash. It was the only time I ever punched someone in the face. Whoa, the B, was just mean. This happened to my mum and I at a laundromat a few years back. My mum and I were sitting down, watching TV at the local laundromat while we were waiting for our clothes to get done in the washer. Eventually, a woman approached us and began talking about everyday things such as her job and whatnot. She seemed like a pretty normal person at first, but then, things got very weird very quickly. I decided to go to the bathroom mid-conversation, leaving my mom with the lady to converse some more. After I finished in the bathroom, I came back to see my mom, who was now alone, pale as a ghost. I asked her, "Hey, what happened? Where did that lady go?" After a long and awkward pause, she told me that soon after I left to go to the bathroom, the lady told my mom that she makes routine trips to low-income neighborhoods, steals people's lingering pets, takes them back to her house, and brutally beats them to death with either a hammer or a shovel. I felt sick to my stomach. My mother said for a woman who seemed so charming and lovely at first, she showed zero remorse or shame in what she did. He kicked my dog, and when I told him off, he said something along the lines of, "Well, it's not like it's feeling matter." Another friend said, "How would you feel if we kicked you?" and he said that we couldn't do anything that would hurt him. I think he joined the military, but I honestly have lost all contact. I was in the military for a while. There are a lot of really crappy people in the military. I can confidently say for a fair bit of them that if they weren't in the military they'd be in prison instead. My ex was always weird and emotionally stunted, would never come out of his shell or let anyone in, which was a big problem to the relationship. But that's just background. One day we were at our friend's house and the conversation turned to creepy and weird things. He brought up the dark web and said something about a YouTube channel that discussed weird things that can be found on the dark web. Then he asked if we had heard of Crush P, and the look on his face and his tone told me that this was more than a casual inquiry. It seemed more like he was gauging us for our reaction to see if we were into Crush P. We asked what it was and he said it was videos of women in stiletto heels crushing things like kittens, filmed from below through glass and the like. It was oddly specific, and still his tone and careful considering expression told me he was hyper aware of our reaction. When we reacted negatively to that being a thing, he immediately switched gears and started laughing like, right, how could anyone be into that? When I finally did break things off, we had a heart-to-heart about all the ways our relationship had deteriorated. He was able to admit that he never let me in because he was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Still have no idea what he was hiding, but I think it may have been at least partially related to that Crush P conversation, among other things. I thought it meant like a porno where the plot is one has a crush on the other and they get to bang. When he and a friend violated a girl with a flashlight at the end of a party. Girl was super drunk and definitely not able to give consent. I'm pretty sure an ex of mine is a psychopath. He had signs of it, like being manipulative, very selfish, no empathy, constant lying. I think the moment I twigged was when he came home early from work and said he'd been sent home because he told his boss I had hung myself the night before. I asked him why he'd said that and he just shrugged. When my ex-boss at the youth service actually barricaded the door of her office to stop me leaving. She had me cornered in my wheelchair. The office was too small for me to turn round. Meanwhile, my colleagues were outside the office literally trying to break the door down to rescue me. Hours before an assembly in middle school, they were big events as every class was shortened to give each class time, so we all knew when the day started there would be an assembly. This kid that bullied me every single day told me he was going to shoot the school up and I was worried, of course, but this is the same kid who said he would kill me every now and then, but then he pulled out a freaking revolver and chuckled. "Today's gonna be a big day, man, see you at the assembly." I froze and told my closest teacher immediately. Thank God he was retired military. He called the police immediately and within the 20-minute frame he showed me the gun they found him. His loaded .44 with about 30 rounds in his backpack. Teacher talked to me for about an hour the rest of the day to continue gathering evidence of his bullying to me. Saw him years later for another crime in the news. Frick that guy, man. You saved a bunch of kids' lives. My period was late and I had let the dude know it was. First time my period was ever late while on birth control pills, but I had recently switched to a different one. He immediately started blaming me for not taking my birth control right and that if I was pregnant he would kill me. I even told him I doubted I was pregnant and not to worry and that the doctor told me that it might happen. Apparently women are most likely to be murdered when they are pregnant. I went to high school with a guy. We weren't close but had a lot of mutual friends so we were around each other a lot. Once he beat a guy with a tire iron when the guy tried to scam him when he was selling some weed or something. Later on, he went to Iraq and was in some crap. He came home on leave at some point and I was at a bar playing pool with him and he nonchalantly talked about killing people over there. Said he enjoyed it. He was always very calm and chill when I was around him, but I tried to avoid him after that. There was something broken in there. The weirdest part is that he would have these moments or anecdotes of extreme violence, but he always related them calmly. Never felt any sort of regret for any of it. Obviously you can't diagnose someone off of that sort of thing, but I've read that sociopaths make good soldiers and he was fairly successful in the army, I believe. My dad said for years that someone I knew at primary school, 7-11, was a psychopath because he often got in fights with random people and showed no empathy after breaking their bones, and he would often lie about stuff to get them in trouble. I thought he was scary and a bit violent but an alright guy overall. I found out a couple of years ago he's been sentenced to life for murder. Felt no empathy after breaking their bones. But an alright guy overall. He was the stereotypical goth rebel kid in high school. Black trench coat, bad home life. He had kill tattooed on the inside of his lip and liked to show it off for shock value. Loved breaking rules and saying generally creepy things to get a rise out of people. I didn't know him very well at all. He was a couple years older than me, but I always just assumed, from the few interactions I had with him, that he was just a troubled kid who liked to act out. Several years later he murdered his wife. From what I heard, his story was that it was self-defense and she was coming after him, but who really knows? I heard some rumors that she was found in a position that suggested she was trying to get away from him when he shot her. Regardless, it was a horrific and tragic situation all around. Their baby boy was in the house when it happened as well. I think about him a lot. When I had a parent-teacher conference with a student of mine's mom and dad. This was maybe 15 years ago, but it stuck with me. The daughter had some minor issues with math, 3rd grade, and the father insisted that he was a physics professor at an Ivy League university nearby. When I told him his daughter was struggling with the US standard algorithm, he got upset and told me he didn't understand what the word algorithm means. And he's a physics professor? Okay. When I began to explain, his face got completely flat and devoid of any expression. His wife immediately noticed the look on his face. He was staring right at me, not blinking or saying anything, and her face blanched, and she started pulling on his arm and trying to get his attention off me, I assume. When I described it later, I called it a serial killer face. He eventually let her pull him out of the room and end the conference. I immediately told my principal and said I refuse to do another conference alone with these people. I definitely felt as though if I were alone with this man, he would have come after me physically. His wife's response was very telling. I only dealt with her from then on. I didn't actually say US standard algorithm to the parent. I shouldn't have put it here either. It seems the term is confusing, lol. I said addition and subtraction algorithm. When explaining, I was very careful to say it in a way that isn't condescending. I would never expect parents to just know math terms, but I am a talker. So sometimes when I'm explaining I just forget that they might not know it and get carried away with explaining. I might have even apologized for using the term and not just saying carrying and borrowing, which I usually do, but I can't remember now. There was a guy I was in a couple clubs with in high school. He was always really polite but intense. Like the kind of intense you didn't want to make direct eye contact with, if that makes any sense. Anyway, one day we're walking back from McDonald's or somewhere together before our club started. It's just the two of us. and out of nowhere he starts talking about how he's a black belt in some martial art, and gleefully tells me about how in one of his classes they had just learned how to break someone's neck in one move, and how cool it was. I was like, huh, okay then, that's interesting, and just let him go on his merry way. In the back of my mind I was going, this dude is totally going to kill somebody someday. Years later, he makes the local news, not for murder, but physical shaming assault. Dang dude, there needs to be like psychological evaluation done before anybody should be allowed to receive any sort of combat training. Cause goddamn. I am incredibly late, but I actually have a really good story about this. My parents stayed at the same church from the start of their marriage up until I was about 13, roughly 20 years, and most of the families in the church had been there about the same time. Classic small town church, so everyone knew everyone there. One family in particular had a really rough backstory. The grandmother took care of about 7 of the grandchildren, all age 8 and under, as her daughter was in and out of relationships and on and off of drugs. This caused the grandmother to not be able to be very present in her own son's life. The son was named Stephen, and he was about 6 years older than me. I have many memories of him just being downright odd and creepy. Overall, he was known for having issues, and everyone tried their best to steer clear of him. It's like we all thought that it wasn't a matter of if he was going to do something one day, but when. Lo and behold, 9 years ago, he broke into a woman's apartment at his school and dismembered her body. He then dumped parts of her body in the trash bins behind her complex, but some body parts were never found. The woman was known for being the only person to be friendly with him, and there have been reports that she rejected him on a romantic level, and that's what set him off. He murdered her just days before she was set to go back home for summer break. His name was Stephen McDaniel. Look up the case if you'd like. The woman was considered missing for a few days, and there's an interview of a news reporter actually talking to Stephen. He's talking about how much he misses her and how he hopes nothing has happened to her. Then the reporter tells him that a body has been found, and he just goes blank. The rest of the interview is him sitting in the ground trying to grasp the situation at hand. It's a very freaky turn of events. He also strategically placed her body in that dumpster because he knew when the trash was to be collected. The only reason her body was not taken away in a dump truck is because the investigating cop car had blocked the lane to it. Had the trash been collected that day, this case could very well be an unsolved case to this day. I watched his interview with the news, and I honestly don't understand how she didn't run. That look in his eyes when she said they found a body or something was pretty chilling. Lady I worked with. She was a little difficult, not very technical, not very accommodating towards people trying to solve her tech problems, but nothing out of the ordinary, except occasionally her kids would call her at work and she would say just unforgivable things to them. And then one day she just casually mentions that she has the family pets euthanized when she gets bored with them. I actually didn't believe her and asked her to confirm. I totally understood her correctly the first time. She just straight up kills pets whenever she feels like it. And this woman kept talking about how she should totally get a dog. My parents did this when I was in high school. We had this super sweet German Shepherd for about 7-8 years. Then one day, they decided they were tired of taking care of her. Instead of finding another home, they had her put down. It's been over 10 years and I still haven't forgiven them. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.